Right. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon. My name is Donald MacLeod, and I'm your facilitator for this afternoon. Alan, our technician here, has given me some very helpful pointers. You do not need to touch a single thing, okay? Don't worry, Alan is going to handle everything. He'll turn on your mic when you're speaking. Mobile phones, please, as a courtesy, can you turn them off? If they ring, they're going to cause problems for the sound system. So, you can put it on vibrate, but please don't answer it here. If you have to, not even vibrate. Off. Off. Alan's very clear about that. It needs to go off. So if anything's happening that you need to go and do something about a phone, you would need to go out of the room to do that. Okay? That would be very helpful. As far as this event is concerned, it's been webcast live, which is very helpful for us all because we then have a permanent record of the meeting and are able to look back at points. The purpose of our workshop this year is to identify specific actions, that SOPA can promote nationally and locally in campaigning on the issues that concern you. What we are going to try and do is concentrate perhaps on one or two topics from the list that you have in front of you. You see the concerns that are listed on the programme. They're in priority order. These concerns have emerged from work that SOPA has done in its campaign trail as described in the programme as well. So they're not out of the top of people's heads. They're something that has emerged from conversations, numerous conversations up and down the land. We would like to be able to identify up to 2 campaigning actions for presentation in the plenary session. That doesn't mean that the other actions will be forgotten about. We will have a record of them. Mike Liddell here will be keeping a record of the meeting. He will be reporting on it. He will be scribing for us, and we will have that record and we'll be able to pursue these particular issues. We're delighted that you're here. We have a smaller number this year than we had last year, so that gives people an opportunity to speak. But in order for people to have that opportunity to speak, we need to be respectful of one another. We need to be focused on our task at hand, and we need to try and keep our conversations short and avoid points that have already been raised repeatedly. As I said, if there are issues that people feel are not fully covered later, we will still have a record of them and be able to act on these. So can we agree on that way of working, that we will be respectful of one another, give people the opportunity to speak, and in order to do that, keep your own contributions short, if that's okay. What we're going to begin with is a presentation from John White, who is a member of the SOPA committee. He will speak for 5 minutes about what has been happening and the actions that have arisen from SOPA's work. And then we'll have a time for questions. If you've got some questions that you want to ask, then we'll have several minutes for that. And then we'll go on to the points that concern you. What are the burning issues of the day for you that you would like to raise? People happy with that as an outline? And so on. Yeah? Great. Thank you very much. Well, I'll hand over to John.
Well, thank you, Donald. Good afternoon to you all. We've got about 50 minutes to focus on 1 or 2 topics, as Donald has said, and as Tom mentioned in his speech this morning, to come to a conclusion to be presented at the end of the Assembly. The 6 topics in the programme have resulted from SOPA's representative visiting around about 30 places throughout Scotland and at least 6 groups. People were asked about their experiences and to raise any concerns they had. and these are summarised to form SOPA's priorities, now presented to you for further discussion. They are housing and community safety, health and social care, transport, travel and environment, community empowerment, retirement, pensions and money matters, communication and information. Our duty today is to identify specific actions SOPA can promote nationally and locally in campaigning on. Just one or two priority areas only. You decide. As you are well aware, Holyrood elections come in the next 6 months, and older people represent at least 20%, 1/5 of voters. So this is your chance for SOPA to push the priorities you believe can make a difference and all are important. Do note, following the details of the topics that are listed, possible campaigning action. For example, on health and social care, SOPA urgently calls for older people to be on the new integrated joint boards. Men in suits discuss older people, but the older person whom has the experience of illness, chemotherapy, radiotherapy, and all that follows are not included. They must be. And they must be able to speak and participate in designing that care. I've already spoken about this. On Friday, I will have a meeting with the Chief Executive of the Integrated Board. That's of my area. So let's push our experiences. That is only one example, and there are numerous others that you can see in the programme. So don't be afraid to give your thoughts. Anything outside of the topic, as you heard Donald say, will be noted and placed before the SOPA for future thinking. But we must be totally focused today on those 6 topics. I will now pass you back to Donald, who will ensure all have the opportunity to speak. Thank you. Donald.
Thanks very much, John. Though we don't have time to go round and get introductions, if you have a question or if you later want to make a contribution, it would be helpful if you just told us who you are and where you're from. Are there any questions that people have at this moment? No?
Are we
Yes.
going to work through the list one by one that you have here, or are we just going to speak generally?
We're going to have an initial conversation to see if people want to work their way through the list or whether there are particular topics. The guidance suggests that because it's a big list, that we concentrate on 1 or 2 topics, and we would focus on that. But if you collectively decide you've got points to make under the other headings, then we can look at that.
Would it, Chair, not be if each of the topics was identified and we show by a vote of hands as to which topics we should deal with? That might be the quickest way of identifying 1 or 2.
Well, John's come up with a proposal there. Do people want to do that? Do a show of hands and say what particular topics you would like to look at? Or do you want to have a general discussion initially and then look at particular topics, particular issues? Any views on that? Show of hands. Are people comfortable with a show of hands about the topic? Helen.
Yeah. Could I ask that before we call for a show of hands, we get an opportunity to explain why we think a particular issue should have priority?
Yeah. Yes. Certainly. That would be that's a good way of approaching it. Has anyone else got any question, any query about that direction?
I think this is the time when the health and social care is being integrated, you see.
Right.
And the people who are going to mainly affected by this service are elderly people.
Right.
So I think it is fair that we should give that a priority
Yeah.
and discuss that topic,
Right.
including any other topic that we want to discuss.
Okay. And your name is for the...
My name is Dr. Balkishan Agrawal. I am a GP.
Right.
And I do a lot of voluntary work as well.
Right. Okay, thank you. So we've had a proposal for health and social care here.
Some systematic action for people that are hard of hearing. My husband is hard of hearing. And random use of loop systems is very poorly organised in Scotland. And I think a systematic survey of facilities for everyone with hard of hearing at different outlets advertising the ear sign should be checked.
And would you feel that that would be covered under a health and social care discussion?
Communication.
Communication, yeah, communication, okay. Okay. Are there any other?
I would want to talk about health and social care. I think that's an integral part of the whole business. And the other one is communication.
Right.
So 2 and 6.
Okay. Helen.
And Biggins from Seniors Together in South Lanarkshire, and I would also like to reiterate what John Young has spoken about, the importance of the impending legislation on the integration of health and social care.
Right. Thank you. Any other? Yes.
Eileen Wallace, I sit on the SOPA committee, and I also would like to enhance health and social care, particularly in relation to the Integration Joint Board and the strategic planning boards which are taking place and have to be in place in Scotland by the 1st of April next year.
Okay, we're getting strong representation for health and social care, and we've had a couple of representations on communication. Are there any of the other topics that people would like to speak about? No?
I would like to speak about computer use as well in elderly people.
Right, computer use. Okay, that could be under communication as well, communication information, yeah? All right, do I take it from that? We don't really even need a show of hands, that we're happy with health and social care and communication and information as our two topics. Yeah? Well, thank you very much. You've been very, very good at enabling that decision to be taken out. So let's spend the next 20 minutes looking at health and social care issues. Helen.
Thank you, Chair. I've raised this matter on numerous occasions, both locally and here, if you remember, Donald, in the Scottish Parliament last year. And although we, as older people, are promised and told that we're going to be able to have a voice in terms of the design of health and social care, it's very, very difficult, as you know, Eileen, to achieve that locally. And one of the reasons is that the representation of older people is not included in the legislation. The legislation specifies that the Joint Commissioning Board, a group and the integrated board shall have representation from the community, but for carers, that is family carers, for members of the Public Partnership Forum and for the voluntary sector. Older people are meant to be included within the voluntary sector. And I've pointed out time and time again, older people are not volunteers. Older people form the greatest part of that community that requires care, and therefore they should have their own voice, and have raised it so often because when you try to speak about it to those people who have the influence and the power to appoint people to those groups and, for instance, to that board, they say that it is not specified in the legislation. So I'm asking that the Scottish Government have that enshrined in the legislation so that we can't be put off from having our voice heard and for us to have a choice, as John said, in the way that our health care and social care is designed. And I would be campaigning with all older people to try to make sure that the Scottish Government not only takes heed of it, but takes action to ensure the older people's voice is heard at all levels.
So a very specific contribution there. I mean, I'm interested, we need to get a wide view from yourselves as to what you think about the points Helen's raising or any other health and social care matters that you have.
Now, I am putting forward another reason why older people should be represented in the Joint Integration Board. Now, as you get older, you are likely to have more medical conditions. So at 70, you have got 5 medical conditions. By the time you are 80, you might have 10. So the older people have direct experience of using the service, their personal experience, and their story is very powerful. Now, the way the health service now works is if you ask a manager, he will say, oh, we have done a survey amongst 1,000 older people, and 95% of the people are satisfied with the service. But what about the 5% who are not satisfied? If you ask those 5% of the people and ask their story, they will tell you a very powerful story. And that will reveal a major loophole in the service which can only be improved if you listen to them. So the present health service, they say, is person-centered.
Yes.
It is centered around the person, and that very person, the elderly people, is excluded from speaking out at the board.
Yeah.
So I think that's a very good reason to allow us to represent ourselves in the board.
Yes. Right. These are very strong arguments that Mike will be capturing. Other opinions on health and social care? Go Patricia, then John.
Patricia Wally from City for All Ages, Edinburgh. I'm really concerned for older people about the creeping privatisation that's coming into the health service because of lack of funding. Older people need more than 10 minutes when they go to see a GP, and often maybe physiotherapy or some other allied health professional. And either there's a long waiting list or the GP just looks at you and you know, well, if I'm going to get the service, I'm going to need to pay for it. What about those people that can't pay?
Thank you very much, Donald. Along with what Helen's saying, I totally concur with all that. I'll give you an example. I was at a meeting about 2 weeks ago when the chairman, he was from the local authority, because this group floats between the NHS and the council. It was the local authority chairman that was mentioning this. And the first question was asked, do you think that this covers all what in Dumfries people are wanting? And I said no. And he said, I am not accepting that. We'll go along with this. Consequently, if you're not careful, they go along with the view of what they are wanting, and you're not having your say. Ultimately, I wrote to him and told him how appalled I was at that, and if that was being taken back to the Integrated Joint Board, he is misleading them. So that is that. So we've got to put our force there, and we can do it. There's no doubt about it. We can force the issue. And Ellen is right. Let's get the Scottish Government to initiate that this is a must. And that is one way.
I would absolutely agree. It needs to be on a legal basis to enforce it, to make it happen. It's not to be optional or which way is the wind blowing, yeah, we'll have somebody in as a token person. It needs to be an absolute requirement. The people who know what the services are, and it's called improving the patient's pathway. The patient needs to be part of that in terms of developing it. So absolutely, we need to be there. We need to be influencing what the choices are. But the way the bureaucracy works, unless it's a legal requirement to have somebody on from the service users. It won't happen in a routine kind of way. It'll be, well, we've got to have this person in. It's a bit of tokenistic nonsense. But if it's a legal requirement, it gives it status and credibility, and I would absolutely support that.
Well, thank you. Very forceful contribution. Other comments?
I would like to declare an interest, and I have to declare an interest here, Donald. Last week I was the user person on the Strategic Planning Board for Stirling and Clacks. We went through a rigorous governance process, got to that instigation, and I actually applied for the Strategic Planning Board post between Stirling and Clacks. Stirling and Clackmannan have come together in Forth Valley. Falkirk are going their own way, but Stirling and Clacks have gone together, and we decided that we didn't only want a person for Stirling. I know nothing about Clacks. I really don't know that area. So the fact was that we decided at our PPF that Clacks would have a person and we would have a person. I submitted a CV to that and actually spoke to my own Public Partnership Forum last week and got the Strategic Planning Board place. I'm very happy about that, but my one case is it's so many of Health Board, so many of local authority, and I as a user, there's also a carer on and there's also someone from the third sector. But I have actually no voting rights on that scenario, and I think legislation needs to be made very clear. It doesn't matter how long I talk with or to this group. I feel unless I have legal representation, and I'm very happy to go any further with that, that in actual fact, my voice is just another voice in the wilderness.
All right, thank you. Other comments about health and so we don't just need to be limited to talking about the integrated boards at the moment. Critical though that topic is, there are other health and social care matters that you might want to raise. Are there any other?
Could I just throw... sorry.
I'm very concerned about the lack of beds for mental health, particularly for older people. The service seems under crisis in the Lothians, and I would be interested to hear from other colleagues whether this is the same. We actually reached the stage where phone calls are made around Scotland, have you got a bed for an older person, which is just not satisfactory, and this is acute and the dementia wards.
And dementia wards, yes. And you specifically reference mental health.
Mental health.
Mental
yeah,
health,
yeah,
right. So mental health in older people and provision for them within hospital.
It's a crisis point in Lothian.
Right, okay. Good.
Is much more than just one particular client group. As we all know, the demographics are going through the roof over the next wee while. The budgets are going in the other direction. And the pressures in the system are phenomenal. In certain areas, certainly in Edinburgh, waiting for a care placement or waiting for a care at home package, you're waiting a long, long time to make it happen. And my primary concern is that how are we going to manage the ever-increasing needs with a fairly static budget? And how do we make those kind of choices? And how do carers and families deal with the shortfall in relation to not being able to get the quality or the level of care that's needed to sustain somebody? It was mentioned up the stairs that people want to live in their own homes. And how do we do that? How is the health and social care practice and integration going to facilitate that in terms of meeting the service users' requirements?
Do you have, I mean, one of the things that Tom was referencing at the, in his speech was, it would be great if people came up with ideas as to how it could be done. I mean, we've talked about one aspect. Several people have talked about older people need to be in the decision-making. The 5% who are experiencing very poor quality services have got powerful stories to tell. They need to be heard. People who are not able to get the service that they require, that you've referenced, Patricia. Do you have some answers as to the how?
I think there's two things for me. One is we need a policy of prevention that kind of underpins things going forward so that the demand can be managed in some kind of way. So prevention needs to be looked at. What are the strategies that will allow things to be managed in a more effective way? The other bit for me is the other topic that we're going to look at, which is about communication and information. There's absolutely a minimal amount of information out there, and that's accessible to service users. Okay. I hear about people saying, well, we've got this digital world and people can go online and do that. A huge proportion of older people haven't a Scooby as to how to go online and do things and to access information. So, we need to look at prevention. We need to look at how the service is managed on a day-to-day basis. And integration will offer some things, but it's going to take a huge amount of time to bed in and work. But the other bit is about how we get information out to carers and families and service users that allows them to engage in a more effective kind of way.
Some excellent suggestions there and very useful ones to take up. Yes.
Yes, I agree to do with mental health. I think there's a dire need of more training. For instance, I've got mental health problems, right. Specifically obsessive-compulsive disorder. Right. And I've been living in Scotland for a few years now, but I haven't even bothered to go to find out a psychiatrist or psychologist at the moment, because I know there's a long waiting list, and right. If people want CBT, especially if you've got obsessive-compulsive problem, they can wait months, into years.
Yes. So you're saying even the knowledge of the waiting list is deterring you from actually accessing services that you require?
Well, I have actually, because of some circumstance cropped up, I am actually on the waiting list now to get involved with social services. Right. But I'm actually paying for years now for part-time carers out of my own pocket, and that's getting pretty expensive. Right.
So you're attending to your own needs, but you're needing more that you're feeling at the moment that you couldn't get what you need. Yes. It sounds like.
And certainly as I get older, I need, a lot more support, as so many people would.
Yeah. And you're needing a way through to that, a pathway that's clear to that. Yeah, that's very helpful. Any other comments about, particularly about solutions as well? Yes.
Yeah. When we're speaking about prevention, could I just say one thing? One means of ensuring prevention of people using services is for the promotion of health and well-being schemes. And as it is, older people are devising ways of financing those themselves. But I think they could do with encouragement from government if they would underpin some of those efforts that are being made to ensure the promotion of health and well-being. And because older people are not just concerned about poor health, they're concerned about maintaining good health. And that would be a great saving in the end, all round, if we could promote health and well-being throughout all of our communities.
John.
Basically, following on what Helen has just said, what support do we need in Scotland to live healthier lives?
Well, John, can I ask you first? What would you answer?
First off, I would say it comes back to education, plus the availability of being able to discuss things with your GP, of which now we're finding very, very much more difficult than in the past. And I think also avoiding the actual isolation so that people can get about and integrate with the community so they can talk and so on. And if they're not isolated, obviously they're involved with some interest, which is helping to give them a healthier lifestyle too.
Right. Okay. I'm just wanting to make sure I'm not missing anybody. If you do put your hand up, if you feel you want to speak and you haven't had an opportunity, I'll come to you.
The point I'm making is, I think the Scottish Government and the Health Service, National Health Service, should invest more money in prevention than it is now. I will just give you an example. A patient, when he is diagnosed with diabetes, that did not happen today because the diagnosis was made today. That process started 10 years ago. And if that patient had been given help and advice during that 10 years' time, and the doctors would have told him, look, you're at risk of diabetes, and we can check you out, and we can give you advice about how to prevent it. If it was prevented, then the health service will save millions of pounds in treating that patient with diabetes. Now, there is a system for that in America, which is working beautifully, and they have spent millions of pounds. There is a specific website called Health in Aging, and in that there is a specific program called Diabetes Prevention Program. An elderly person can log into that, and he will be given all the help and assistance in logging in and using it, and then he can identify information online as to whether he is at risk of getting diabetes, what can he do to prevent it, where can he get help. And that website will give step by step all the help which is available near his home and readily available.
So it's a combination, I mean, that's prevention and also management, self-management as well that's going on there. And yeah.
Then I'm sure that the government will save billions of pounds.
Yeah, okay, that's a very telling contribution. Yeah.
Christine Woods, I just really want to build on the communication for loneliness as well. Don't forget, we're all individuals, we all have individual needs, and it's all very well to talk through a single shared assessment on general assessments, but until we do a specific person-centred assessment and get the GPs on board as well, and join up secondary and primary care and tertiary care, we're never going to move forward unless all agencies talk together. We've still got a very demarcated line. We've got health and social care, which will probably be good, but if you go to the GP, lack of communication. If we go into hospital and come out in the community, lack of communication. And my favourite subject, if we've got someone with a problem, hearing, visual, physical, unless that person is person-centred, you're never going to move forward.
Now, you've raised a good number of issues there that were really helpful. Is there particular solutions that you would advance?
I think an individual care plan, single shared assessment, passport, they tried it in palliative care, they tried it in terminal care. I think we all have to talk together and you have to get the GPs on board. GPs are still the paramount person in care, but with the contracts and everything, it's very difficult to get through the door for certain issues on GPs. They don't, no fault of their own, but they don't know individuals, and if you've got an individual, take for the flu vaccine, I think the system lately has been a disaster in our area because it's up to the person to come forward to ask for their flu vaccine. Bureaucracy has gone mad, and I think you have to get back to the old adage of person-centred care in the journey of care, not just a service.
So but you're highlighting there, one of the main things that you highlighted there was GPs and the fact that within integration, you don't have GPs being integrated within that system.
It's not moved on in all the years. I'm sure we'll all agree. Over the past years, yes, there has been progress, but you've still got single shared assessment in its own little compartments, and the person at home and the carer especially, NHS carers, pass it over to another service for carers. Bad news.
Right. Last contribution under health and social care before we move on.
I think we have to recognise we're not starting from a good place.
No.
And there's lots of issues in there. And for me, I think we have to keep it real and make very clear what the quick wins are, or the achievable wins are, and build it up incrementally. Because there are some very fundamental issues in here that are going to take a generation to change in some senses. But if we look at some of the specifics and some of the quick wins that we can achieve that will make a difference, that we can deliver, then that's what we should aim at.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry.
But if GPs and primary care and secondary care, if their IT systems don't speak to one another, how are we going to have person-centred care? So I would need to bring that forward as well.
Yeah. So there's a lot to do with the new GP contract up in a couple of years' time. So that'll be of real interest. We'll move on to communication and information. Do you want to?
Actually, I want to do this on health and social care.
Oh, right, okay.
Is that all right, before we leave it?
Yes, sure.
I'm representing the LGBT community.
Right.
And they've got special needs, especially transgender people.
Yes.
As they get older, they can be quite complicated. Yes. So that needs to be considered with all sort of social service and GPs, and if you have to go into hospital or care home.
Right.
Yeah.
The transgender issues particularly
Yes.
need consideration. Right. Thank you. The communication and information. I'll come back to you.
Christine Woods, Grey Matters, Helmsburg. We've got a fantastic audio system here where we can all hear, and all the facilities are prime for communication. We're talking also of loneliness, people at home not able to get out. Hard of hearing is an issue which is particularly close to my heart for personal reasons. But in Scotland, you have lovely theatres, you've got lovely hydro, you've got the concert hall. But if someone is hard of hearing, you go to the hydro, you sit in a seat which you've paid for, and unless you're in a specific area for people that are hard of hearing, you're isolated. There is a sign to say that the loop system's working. It didn't the last time we visited. Concert hall, you have to go to a specific area to be singled out for a loop system. Was it working? Not well enough. You go to a bank, it's got the sign, but does it work? No. It's frustrating because people who have hard of hearing, they want to be part of the community. You go to the NHS and you get your hearing aids, and if the hearing aids are over a budget, you don't get the appropriate hearing aid. You get a limit, but you're dependent on budgets and money. What I would like is a campaign to local authorities to look at every service for people, not necessarily older people, banks, shops, you name it, that show a sign with the ear to make sure that that loop system's working. Services, the likes of the Hydro, the Glasgow Concert Hall, your theatres, make sure it's actually functioning, because it's all very well to advertise, but when it doesn't work, it's so frustrating. I just think it's a very simple campaign, and we're all got facilities that you could do it for vision, you could do it for physical disability as well. But I think hard of hearing, the charities are not getting the funding that they got in the past. I know in certain areas they have gone round the streets and the shops and seen what services are available. But I think local areas could look at their own little area and campaign and make sure that services for hard of hearing are top-notch.
From that, Christine, thank you. I'm getting the impression you're saying the local authorities could be policing, regulating, looking at all sorts of access issues, because that's what you talked. You talked about hearing, you talked about vision, and you talked about physical access as well. And if they were doing the lot, and you think that could have quite an impact.
Yes, and I would suggest could do it with volunteers, not necessarily
volunteers.
Staff.
Okay. There's a very specific proposal. Now, are there any other communication and information issues that were being raised, you want to raise?
Right. My point is, some of the elderly people, well, quite a lot of the elderly people are housebound. Yes. And they don't have their family near them. Their family are living far away down south in England or even abroad, you see. So they cannot visit them regularly, either way. So the only way they can communicate with their family by digital method, by online, they can use the Skype. But very few elderly people know how to do it. And when they do, they are scared of various things, because they are scared, oh, will I be attacked by a spasm? And they might. They might get a spasm through the email. Their computer might be attacked by a virus. So I think elderly people need help and assistance in how to use the computer and how safely to use the computer. And this would be help, practical help they should get.
So you're arguing for even more resources to be put forward for older people to be enabled to go online, to combat isolation, to be able to communicate with people, Skype, etc. Yeah, that's...
I recognise there's a huge vacuum in information for older people, and it's not just about digital, it has to be paper and sensitive to the service user. We need to be much more bullish about how we put information out, much more streetwise about how we get the message out there. SOPA's a great organisation, I put leaflets out and people said, what's this about? They didn't know about it. There's a gap there. We have to find some better way of doing it, and it needs to be targeted at the right audiences. And, okay, there's hearing, there's vision, there's a whole plethora of issues out there that older people need to know about. And it's about avoiding social isolation, about sports, about healthy living and well-being, all those things that come into that kind of gambit. We need to find a way of repositioning the needs of older people and communicating it much more effectively. It doesn't work at the moment.
So you're arguing for that repositioning on multiple levels. You're talking about.
It's a generic.
Yeah.
It's not about specifics. There are specifics there, but it's about the needs, the wider needs of older people and how they access services. And it's about digital, and it's about paper, and it's about voice, and all the other ways of doing it, radio, television. It's kind of an undercurrent at the minute. It needs to be up there and in people's face, but otherwise it won't happen. One of the
startling statistics is that about a quarter of the population is health illiterate. And if you're health illiterate, seriously health illiterate, you have a reduced life expectancy, allowing for everything else, of about 5 years, just in terms of health illiteracy. And there are well-known ways of dealing with that, which include teach-back methods, how older people and others who are health illiterate can speak back and say, this is what we understand you to say, because so many people just nod when they get the information. We don't know that they understand, and there are too many presumptions. So there's a phenomenal amount to be done around all these communication issues. John was wanting to speak, and I think there's someone else.
Yeah, thanks. I go along with what the doctor says in the terms of the isolation and families living away from home, and also so with what you've been saying. I totally concur with all that. But let's ask ourselves, how are we going to pay for this? You've talked about the various actions that should be taken, but where is the money coming from in which to put it on the table to say, yes, we can do this, the money is here? Where is it going to come from?
In that sense, but there must be ways. I mean, I'm stating the obvious. Is there something through the lottery fund? Have we made an application for that we could put together a package that would say, you know, through the lottery fund we could get some money? There are other charitable trusts. There are other ways. But if you raise the profile and you raise the awareness, some of that will generate greater interest and perhaps get donations coming in a different kind of way. But because it's below the radar, people don't see it and don't recognise it, and it's not a problem. So why worry about it? But if it comes up the agenda a bit and people start to see it as being something that merits attention, perhaps you'll get some more money. Perhaps the lottery would look at it differently. I don't know. I mean, I don't have the magic answer, but I think we have to not be complacent and say, well, the money's too difficult, therefore we can't do anything. We've got to look at things in a different kind of way to see whether there are opportunities to generate some income. And maybe, you know, it may not work, it may, but it's worth a try.
But probably we're going to need some central direction on this, because this is a local thing. It's not isolated for one area or another. I think it's right across the board, and therefore I think we've got to come back for some central direction on this.
I would say that money could come from actually saving money if people were introduced to computers and using computers. If we could be allowed to make our own appointments through email or cancel appointments, there'd be fewer people not turning up. So perhaps we could look at ways to save money and then produce money for these electronic ideas.
Yes, welcome.
Debbie Finlay, I'm from a local authority in the west of Scotland. I suppose what occurs to me is about people's rights, and particularly welfare rights. It's very, very confusing, the pathway to care, for nursing care, for free personal care, for their self-directed support now. There's entitlements that people have, but I'm a qualified social worker, and it's a struggle for me to understand who can get what and how. So really I think we need to look at how we can make welfare rights more accessible, and welfare rights teams are generally under a lot of pressure due to austerity, and younger people, their incomes are affected by that as well. So until we can start giving people the knowledge that they need and make it good communication so everybody understands their rights and understands what their options are, I think that would increase things and give people choice.
And how do you think that could be best done?
That's a good question. I don't know. I think you would need more welfare rights officers,
Right.
you know, to be in the community, to be in different places in the community. I believe the Citizens Advice Bureaus are quite busy as well. So for people to know their rights and know what's there for them, you have to be able to manage that yourself and to go and do the research. But if you're not able to do that, you need help to do that. So it's how do we manage that?
Right.
How do we manage that? I think we go the other way around, and you've got the multinational companies, Vodafone, EE, etc. Why don't they organise a campaign to go to them and say, look, can you cut your prices for older people so as a grandchild can show them how to work, iPhones, etc. Go to the top. They're making billions of profit. Why should we increase their profits? We should go to these companies and say, look, can we look for some concessions? Because you're going to have an older person's illiterate nation sitting, because many people here have gone to their grandchildren and said, how does this work? And they'll show you right away how it works. We're way behind and we're becoming literally speechless when it comes to high-tech stuff.
Well, there's a very concrete suggestion, indeed. I'm just wanting, before I come to you, Helen, some people may not want to contribute, other people... I'm just wanting to make sure that everyone has had the opportunity to speak. Yes.
I'm Linda Jolly. I'm actually a volunteer with the Care Inspectorate, so I actually go around some of the care homes. And it's brilliant. Some of the care homes actually, some of the residents actually Skype their families, and I just think that's absolutely brilliant. And what a difference. I went into a care home where a lady had her room all set up. She had her computer, her printer and everything, her Skype stuff, all organised. Brilliant. Some of the homes actually do have specific, you know, a specific area where they can be used. Going back to people at home, though, it's all very well going on about the computers, but how can they manage to purchase the computer? So it's not always the case of knowing how to work them, but how can they purchase the computer in the first place? And I think we have to think along those lines. When, I mean, we did buy, my husband and I did buy a new computer a couple of years ago when we retired. When anything happens to that, will we be able to buy another computer? I don't know that we will be. So you have to think along those lines as well. And the other thing as well is the phone calls. If we are thinking of trying to get word out about different things, in our house we have, I can guarantee you every day, 1 o'clock, 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock. We have actually recently had a phone call in the middle of the night, people trying to tell us different things, PPI, etc., all these things. But the government initiatives, that's a big one, and you know, all the things trying to get your house heated, etc. But it's the phone calls that these companies are using, and I just think that's so very wrong as well. I admit, okay, I've been in a fortunate position, I'm a bit younger, but it is really quite frightening, and it must be very frightening if it's an elderly person who is living on their own, who is not perhaps in the best of health, both physically and mentally, to be receiving these calls. And I think we have to do more about these calls as well. So
dealing with these negative forms of communication as well, and the pressure that it puts on older people is critical. Yeah, and it might mean involving some of the phone companies more. That's part of what you're suggesting, etc. And these sort of things cost less than £100 now. And it's a question of whether, in prevention terms, is it worth people investing in these things to combat some of the isolation when we were hearing about depression as being such an issue. Now, we're moving to really a time of final contributions. Anybody who has not spoken? First of all, anybody who's not spoken? Yes.
Hello, everybody. I'm from HIV Scotland. My name's Liam Beattie, and we've actually given a presentation to the cross-party group for older people. One of the things we're talking about is obviously people are living longer, people are having sex at older age as well. So I guess this kind of straddles across both communication and healthcare, that we think there's an area of work that needs to be done to ensure that older people can access sexual health information as well, because a lot of it is really targeted towards younger people, and we need to ensure that that information is accessible to older people as well. Not necessarily done in a patronising way, but so it's relevant and up-to-date and, as you say, easy to access as well.
So that's got implications for both.
Yes.
Yeah. Are there any other specific measures? I mean, you talked about the accessibility of that information in terms of communication about sex and older people. And are there other issues that we need to be addressing?
I think perhaps there's an opportunity there to have support groups as well, specifically for older people. So perhaps for older LGBT people or older people living with illnesses such as HIV, because we've often found that peer support groups are sometimes the best way to bring people together and not only combat social isolation, but allows people to actually share their experiences of growing older. And an area of particular work that we've been looking at is older people in care homes as well. So you're having a generation of people who are living with HIV for much longer now, and there perhaps needs to be a lot more information for those working in care homes to understand the challenges that can sometimes be in place for people living with illnesses such as HIV.
Right, well, that's very helpful. Now, we've got our final 10 minutes. 2 points that we want to bring to the attention of the full Assembly. What would these 2 points be? On health and social care, we had a big discussion about the need for specific representation of older people on the integrated boards, but we had very firmly it being said that that has to be not tokenistic, it has to be enshrined in regulation law to make it compulsory. We had Eileen's telling point about the fact that it's not just one person and no voting rights, etc. There has to be a systematic way of looking at it that Helen talked about, that it's available at all levels. And many of the other issues that people have talked about in health and social care, it would seem like the prevention issues that have been raised, if older people were empowered to be involved in the whole decision-making process and the commissioning of services, then we would get services that reflect what older people need, both the health and well-being that was being talked about, but also the management of services and so on. So are we saying that we've got a proposal on the final page that talks about SOPA urgently calls for older people to be on the new integrated joint boards in Scotland so that their wider well-being needs are considered when designing services. It seems to be it's that and more that you're asking for. Is that right? What would you add to that? That it would be a legal requirement, yeah, for older people to be, and the issue about, we can clarify wording later, John will be reporting back, but saying it's not tokenistic, it needs to be embedded at all levels so that it's not just one or two people that are hived off and then become like the managers and so on, as it's easy to be assimilated, but rather it's constant. There's a constant flow. Is that right? Would that clear governance route?
Clear governance.
And clear decision-making, clear reporting back to older people. Yeah, we're looking at something that's pretty comprehensive there and well embedded.
And all have an equal vote.
And all have an equal vote, yeah.
How I would put it is that it has to be enshrined in legislation.
Yeah, enshrined in legislation, okay. We're not happy with it just being left open for people to use their discretion.
Ad hoc system can be unutilized. That's not giving the correct measure. I don't think in Scotland we need to make the formation clear.
And I think the points you were making very strongly were older people are the primary consumers, that they're number one consumers of the health and social care. Therefore, they need specific representation and it can't be lost in the voluntary sector or some other entity, right? Is that okay? Mike, do you feel confident enough? You've got stuff there about... Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. You drop. Yep. Mike's been recording faithfully many things that have been said. Okay. Health and social care, we've got that as a proposition. Communication. At the moment, what it says, communication and information. It says SOPA calls on the Scottish Government to properly resource a range of readily available communication options, including non-digital materials, which is quite wide. Do you want to...
Qualities. I mean, if you're going to do the first part of the work, you have to look at inclusiveness and not just having certain groups that can contribute. You have to look at everyone and give everyone, you know, the facilities and the goods and the knowledge that they need to contribute.
So in communication and information, you're really wanting equalities in here to be addressed and rights.
Any gaps closed, because it's all very well to tick a box and say that we're an equal society, but we aren't. We've got very many gaps, and it's to check what is actually happening out there and to do more audit and surveys and make sure if something says it's got this facility that it actually has. I don't know about this building itself. I didn't see many facilities for hard of hearing. I don't know if there are. Can you tell me? Is there a loop system in the room that we're upstairs?
There's one in here.
You know, someone's got to check it out, but that's not really... Yeah. I know in hospitals the boxes don't. Thanks.
So what we're saying is that it's not just a matter of saying you have these things, but being audited and proving that...
By the council, hospital, you name it. that needs to be done.
Comprehensive, holistic strategy, which is about information sharing and getting it out to the audiences, targeting it in a much more specific kind of way. There are some specifics, but there's a much more general need to get information out to older people about a whole range of services. And we need to think tactically how we do that differently from what we're doing at the minute, because what we're doing at the minute doesn't work.
From what I understood what you were saying earlier, Gordon, was one is it's about SOPA itself and its communication, because you referenced that. And then the second is how all various government systems of one kind or another communicate and inform older people.
Yes, that's fair.
That's okay. That's that broken down there. John, you were...
One of the things that I'd like to have heard more of is we've talked about various aspects of action, but when you present cases, they always say, how are you going to pay for it? Now, we haven't really got that. We've learnt and heard an awful lot, but where is the money coming from? This is what concerns me.
Well, just we'll come in a minute. I just want to reference the point that was being made about maybe some of the multinational companies, and there might be in some of the communication issues. Also, it was being said, and I mean, I'm wondering if that whole aspect was being talked about prevention. That if you prevent by, looking at various things, that will save money in the longer term. Helen.
I wanted to have an opportunity just try to answer John's question. Where is the money coming from? And we know where the money is, and we would like that money to be prioritised, and it's all about prioritising. And that's where we can come in with the influence that we would have through campaigning also. They have a mindset, governance at all levels have a mindset. We want a mind shift, where they would rearrange their priorities, and we're not going to mention tea in the park or anything like that, But what we want to say is, get your priorities right. And as that lady said across there, patient-centred, so it should be service user-centred rather than government policy-centred. Priorities.
So, I mean, that, I suppose, in many senses, patient-centred, individual-centred, looking at the various groups and their needs. It's been talked about, the holistic strategy means that you actually have to look at what each individual requires in order to be able to understand their needs and so on properly and respond to them.
To bear in mind, if you raise the profile and the awareness of the issues and about older people's issues, some of that in itself will attract greater interest. And if SOPA uses that as a kind of launch pad, it may well generate more income. And if there are other ways, like through the private companies or the lottery or whatever, we have to think differently. Money, if we sit here and say we ain't got the money, we'll do nothing. We have to think that we can get the money, and we look at different ways of doing it because it's there. We just have to find the ways of thinking differently about how we attract it in. And as I say, there are, I'm maybe being simplistic and I apologise, but I think we should not sit here and say we can't do it because we've not got the money. Let's start with a much more positive attitude and see what we can do, what we're going to do, and then look at where some of the money might come from in different ways. And if you're proactive, it will attract more interest rather than sitting saying we ain't got the money so we can't do anything.
Well, that's a great positive note on which to end, to say that we will go away and think positively. Your contributions have been excellent. I hope you found the discussion stimulating. It doesn't end here. Obviously, today we go back to the main room again and we'll hear what the other groups have been talking about. But I hope you will continue to be involved in SOPA, and all power to your elbows and wherever you're working and whatever you're doing. But let's stick together, because together we'll make even more of an impact than we can do one by one. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.